The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our 2 year-end webinars. I'm Chris Glanville, the manager of the Sage 100 Help Desk. For today's webinar, Ryan Whipple from our Help Desk will be presenting Accounts Payable Year-End 1099 Processing and E-Filing, followed by Payroll Year-End Procedures and E-Filing. Between each segment, we'll have a question and answer session, so please submit any questions you might have in the chat box, and we'll address them at that time. The session will be recorded and you will be emailed a link. We'll also be presenting a webinar next Tuesday at 4 p.m. on year-end processing for the other Sage modules, and the link for that recording will also be sent. And now I'll pass it over to Ryan to walk you through year-end.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you everybody for coming out today. So the first thing I want to go over in Sage for year-end processing is how to copy your company. It's a good idea to have a copy of your company before you do year-end processing. Many people like to have the copy just as a thing you can go back to and always see that snapshot of how your company was at year-end, and it's always a good safety net to have. You do that company copy in your Sage desktop. You go into your Library Master module, then you go into the main folder, and the top option there is Company Maintenance. In the Company Maintenance window, you want to pull up the company that you're going to copy into. Now, if you're copying over the top of a previous company or previous backup, that may be a code that already exists, or it may be a new code that you're creating just new. So once you create your company code, then you would enter in your company name and any basic information you have. And once you have that all entered, over here on the right-hand side, you have your copy button. So you'll click that, and then it is going to pop up a warning telling you that if you copy individual modules, that like if you were to copy inventory without sales order, it could cause corruption because those two modules are so closely related. And it's also going to tell you that since this is a new company, it needs to save that new record. And then the copy data window comes up. So this is where you choose your source company, and we already set our destination company by what company we were selecting in company maintenance. So this is where it's really important that you have your source and your destination correct, that you don't have those flip. We see that happen every once in a while with clients, and it just means that all of your live data is getting overwritten with a backup, and yeah, it's not good news. So once you put in your source company, it's then going to give you a list of all of the modules that are in that company. So you can select which modules you want to copy. You could be copying just payroll and accounts payable. Maybe those are the ones you're worried about having a backup at the year end. Or you can leave all of them selected and have a full copy. Once you have those selected, then you'd click your Proceed button at the bottom. And you would tell it yes, that you want to copy all data files. And depending on how large your company is that you're copying and the performance of your server will really determine how long it takes to run. Here with just basic demo data, it runs really fast. I have some clients where it can take 10 minutes or more to copy a company. Once it finishes, it takes you back to the company maintenance window. Here you can then see all of the modules that are active in this company. So now you'll be able to go into that backup company and reference any of the information as it was right at year end. And the next thing we'll take a look at is doing your 1099 e-filing or printing. That's in your accounts payable module under the reports folder. And then Form 1099 e-filing and reporting. Now, when you go to launch that, you may get a warning message telling you that e-filing is not installed on your system. It is a separate software that comes with Sage and needs to be installed on any workstations where you're going to be doing any 1099 or W-2 printing. So you'll need to make sure that that is installed. Sage, when it detects that you don't have it installed, will pop up and ask you if you want to install that. You can tell that yes, that you want to install it, and it'll go through and attempt to install it. And depending on your security levels and how your IT has your system set up, will determine whether that goes through just fine or if you have any issues with that. If you need to install it not directly from that prompt, that can be done from your workstation setup folder. So you would browse out to your Mass 90 folder on the server, go into the WK setup folder. In there, you will find an autorun.exe. You'll want to right-click on that and run it as administrator. That's going to bring up this window here, and you'll see the third option down is to install federal and state e-filing and reporting. So from there, you'll click on that. That will open up the installation program. It's very basic and simple to go through. It's basically accepting the terms and conditions and clicking next through several questions, but you shouldn't really need to change anything, and the installation usually goes pretty fast. It only takes a few minutes. Now, if you have any issues getting it to install, usually those are related to security issues on your workstation and the security rights that your user or the user on that workstation has. So it may be a situation where you'll need to have your IT help you with that. Usually if they log on to your workstation with their domain admin user and they'd run the installation with that user, it goes through fine. So now back here in Sage, in the e-filing window, our first step is to print or choose what type of form we want to be printing. So we're going to leave it as a new form. And for our demo, we're printing the 1099 miscellaneous form, but you can pick either dividend or interest. You can choose the type of vendor, whether you wanted to separate and print just your individuals or just your businesses. We're going to do all types. And you can also pick your 1099 calendar year, and you can specify your year-to-date minimum amount. This is also where you specify your company information. So that will all default in and copy in from the company maintenance. But if any of that information is incorrect or you want to adjust it or adjust how it's going to print on the 1099 forms, this is where you can make that change. And we're going to run it for all vendors. So we'll go ahead and hit accept. One more thing to point out is that you have to also be on current maintenance with Sage to be able to have access or rights to using the e-filing section of Sage. So it will try and connect out to Sage's server and download or verify your registration info as well. Also, your forms in Sage for the e-filing, every time you log in and try to print a new form, it goes out to Atrix's website, and Atrix is the company that is partnered with Sage, and Atrix is the one that developed the e-filing portion of Sage. So it connects out to their server, and it checks to see if there's any new or updated forms that need to be downloaded. And if there are any new forms, it will automatically go ahead and bring you to this window and let you install or download those new forms. What you'll want to do is click the automatic update button. That will go ahead and start downloading the forms. So as it's downloading the forms, even though we are here in accounts payable and telling it to do 1099 printing, it goes out to the server and compares all of the different tax forms that apply to payroll and accounts payable across all of the different states. So even if you ran that quite recently, it may pop up and need to download new forms as well. Like for example, I was testing this morning and I had updated my forms as of this morning, and already there's a change out there. So especially at the end of the year, when all the states are putting out the new layouts, you're going to see lots of updated forms. So possibly every time you come in here to run it. So once it finishes downloading the updates, you'll see this window that the update is complete. So we can close that. So once it gets through that process, it takes you here to this wizard. So this wizard is going to walk you through several questions related to your 1099 forms, ask you questions about your company to make sure that everything's formatted and the right boxes are marked on your 1099 forms. This first question here is whether we want to be printing our 1099s for the final version, or whether we want to run through and do a test drive of the forms. So after the webinar, you might go back into your company and come in here and you could do a test drive either with just a few of your recipients, or you could test drive all of it and really get a feel for how long the process will take, to give you an idea of when you need to schedule and plan on running through it. But for today, we're going to do no thanks and process the 1099s. The first question here in the wizard asks you to verify your tax ID number. I have just a dummy number entered here for our demo. This question is asking you whether you have multiple companies in Sage that have the same tax ID number, and if so, whether you want Atrix to combine their 1099 informations together and file that information as one entity. So we're going to tell it no, that you use a single 1099 data file. So this screen gives you another opportunity to verify the payer information that's going to print on the 1099s. So if you wanted to adjust any of the information in here, put in contact information, verify your phone numbers, or put in email addresses, anything like that, you can make those changes here. This is asking you what kind of tax preparer you are. Most people are filing for themselves, but if you happen to be a third-party company filing somebody else's 1099s, you would mark that here. This screen here would show you any states that were going to be affected on this form and give you an opportunity to verify their tax account numbers. This is checking to see if you have any recipients who have elected to receive electronic copies only of their forms. We're going to tell that no. This question is about the recipient's identification numbers. It gives you an opportunity to truncate or mask their ID numbers. So for example, you could truncate it with X's so that you're only showing the last 4 digits of the number. And so that's the last question in the wizard. So once it goes through that, it finishes gathering up the data for your vendors, and it's going to bring it here onto the screen in a data entry grid for us. So this grid shows you all of your 1099 vendors. On the left-hand side, it has the recipient's general information, like their ID numbers, and their addresses and names. The right-hand side is the amounts that would be on the 1099. So for here, our example, everybody was in box 7, so we're seeing all of the dollar amounts over here. Now, depending on what side you're needing to see more information from, you can grab this bar in the center and you can drag it to the left or right to see more or less of either section. Once we get in here, it's going to walk through several steps for us where the system will review the data that you have for your 1099 vendors, and it'll do some basic level of data validation for you. So it walks through several steps of that. So the first step is verifying their tax ID numbers. So you'll also see that it highlights the columns that it's interested in or checking in blue to draw your attention to them. So we can click next. So basically it walked through and checked them, and then it moved on. Now it's comparing the tax ID flag. Now it's verifying the recipient's names and addresses. And this is what it will look like if any of these verification steps come across any issues. So this one here, if we look at the message, address line 1 cannot be blank. And it has highlighted the row and the cell that is having problems in red. So depending on how many errors it comes across, if you have a very large group of vendors that you're working with, and maybe if there's 50 of them that are having problems, you might want to print the list and then be able to review all of the problems on paper. A lot of people find that easier. Otherwise, you can just tell it go back and correct, and it takes you to the first cell where they're having problems. So in this situation where we look at it, we can see that the address looks like it got entered on line 2 instead of on address line 1. So we can make any changes in here in the grid, and that's going to change the data that will print on the 1099 form. So we can take that address and I can cut it out of address line 2 and I can paste it into address line 1. Now this is a change that you can just make here and it will be good for your 1099 printing and everything will show up correctly there. But just keep in mind that changes that we make here on the data entry grid don't affect the vendors that are back in Sage. So in Sage, when we look up the vendor, they still have their address on the second line here. And also keep in mind, if you come back and make any changes to their information here, that does not affect the data that we are seeing here in the 1099 preparation window. But it's usually a good idea to come in here and make the changes in both places. That way you won't have to be fixing these same errors next year, and you'll get it taken care of for good. So now that we've fixed that, we're going to tell it next. The next step is to verify all the income boxes. So you'll go through here, look at all the boxes, look at the amounts. Now, a good way to try and double check these dollar amounts here is you can come back into Sage in the accounts payable module under your reports and down to payment history report. So this report has an option here where you can check this box to print 1099 vendors only. And then you can specify the date range for your checks. So you can tell it all of 2018. And you can have it sort or group by vendor number. So this report, by filtering it down to only the 1099 vendors, lets you look at those and compare the dollar amounts. So I can see that the report total is $9,700. And I can see here that the total for my box 7 is $9,450. So I have a discrepancy somewhere. Now, it could be a situation where you have a vendor and only some of the payments you make to them are applicable to 1099s, and that could be why they're different. But if that's not the situation, you can look through here and try and compare. And I can find here that my 01 Anders vendor had one check for $250 that looks like it didn't get included in that total. So their total was actually $1,500. So again, just like the vendors, you can fix that just here on the 1099 preparer screen, and that will correct it for your 1099 printing. Or you can also fix it both places so that if you start the process over, it will be getting the correct data back into Sage or back into the 1099 printing. So to correct that in the vendor, we come again back to accounts payable, into the main folder, and we go into vendor maintenance. We select the vendor that has the issue. So in this case, it was 01 Anders. We go to the additional tab, and over here on the right-hand side is all of their 1099 information. So this is where you would also mark whether they're business or individual, the form, their ID number, and what their default box is. But you can also click this 1099 history button and come in here and change the amounts. So you might also be moving amounts from a different box. Maybe something got paid by default into box 7, but maybe it was actually royalties payment or some other box. So you can also move dollar amounts around that way. But I'm going to change the dollar amount there in box 7 to $1,500. Accept that and close out of vendor maintenance. And I'm going to come back here and make the same change. Okay, so now that we have reviewed those and we're confident that we have the right dollar amounts, we can click the next step button. And you can also see up here where it tells you what the steps are, that this blue progress bar is kind of advancing, kind of give you an idea of how close you are to getting through the steps. Last one is comparing the filing state. And then the verifying the state income withheld. So now that we've made it through verifying all of the data and fixing any errors that we found, we're to the step where we're going to start printing the 1099s. So this first screen here is from the company I said before is Atrix. They're the company that partners with Sage. So you can use the e-filing section in Sage to print your 1099s for free, or you can pay Atrix and Atrix will e-file the forms for you. Personally, I find it's usually a pretty good deal to pay them. This year it's $229 per recipient. They will actually print the forms, mail them out to your recipients, and they will also allow your recipients to log on to their website and reprint any of the forms themselves in case they lost their copy. So it can also, not only save you a lot of time stuffing envelopes, but save time from people coming back saying they need a reprint of their forms. So from here, we pick what option you want. So again, the first option is complete e-filing. It will show you here how much it's going to cost. They have a $5 minimum. So here in our case, we don't hit that, so it's just going to be $25. Otherwise, you can do other options, and you can choose to just print your forms. And you'll see that the cost is actually $0. Now, when you do print your forms, you do still have to use special paper. You wouldn't be printing them all onto just plain paper. So you will still have that expense for that. The best place, or the place that you want to buy those forms, is actually from Sage. Their website is sagechecks.com. And when you come out to their website, they have a section right here at the top for their tax forms. You pick which form we're interested in. So right now we're looking at 1099s. Then it's going to have this pop-up window that comes up. That's going to ask you to select what kind of software you're using, because obviously Sage has several different softwares. So we are using Sage 100, Mass 90 / Mass 200. And then we're going to pick version 2016 or later that has the e-filing. And then it takes us to this window here. And depending on your company's needs and what options you're going to be choosing, because maybe you're going to have Atrix handle some of the printing, but not all of it, you can pick the different forms here. They usually have one bundle that has everything all together. So this bundle here it has the red copy for the government. Then it has basically plain paper that's perforated and has the registration marks on it that you would be using for printing your vendor's copies of the 1099s. So it gives you all of the forms that you need, and it gives you the envelopes that you need for mailing them out. But you'll see here the smallest quantity you can get is 25, and so that's already putting you up to a price of $53. So it can actually be cheaper to just let Atrix print all the forms for you and deal with all the e-filing, unless you start to get larger volumes of vendors. So for the demo purposes today, though, I want to pick the complete e-filing. So we're going to choose that option and tell it next. It also gives you the option of purchasing an archive version of your 1099s. So they will actually take all of your 1099s, save them to a PDF file, put that on a CD, and mail it to you, so that then you can just keep that archived as a CD, you know, in case you have a server that dies or anything like that. You don't really have the risk of losing it. So that's $35 plus $5 shipping, so $40 to get that. So today I'm going to tell that no thank you. Next screen here is going to let us verify or see what states that we're going to be printing for. So our vendors were in California, so we're just going to leave that checked. And this window here lets you review the choices that you've made, lets you see what forms you're going to be printing. In case you made any mistakes or anything like that, you could then go back and choose different options. So then it's going to walk you through now printing all of your different forms. So it shows you here we're on report 1 of 5. The first is going to be printing the California 1099 MISC form. So you can use the pages, the arrows here to cycle through the pages, and you can review the data in case you wanted to see and make sure everything seems correct. When you're ready to print it, hit the print copy button. Brings up the print window here where you can choose your printer, decide how many copies that you're going to print. If you're not purchasing the PDF copy or the PDFs on the CD, what some people will do is come in here and print the forms to a PDF and maybe save them to a CD themselves, or just save them up to the cloud somewhere, an online backup. Otherwise, when you're ready, you'd pick your regular printer for printing. Now, even though you are printing these forms onto sometimes regular paper, it's still important that the forms line up correctly for the government to accept them. So Atrix has an alignment function that lets you adjust, because every printer pulls paper slightly differently. So you might have a situation where just how the paper was loaded, it's scooted off to the side, and you don't want to deal with having your forms rejected. So you can print an alignment form, and that looks like this. Basically, it prints these lines across the edges with these dots. So each of these lines should be 1 inch from the edge of the paper. So you'll get out a ruler and you'll measure those forms, make sure they're 1 inch. If they are not, you come in here and you can scoot the form to the left, right, up or down until it's lining up, or you can just type in the amounts if you know how far it's off. Once you have the amounts adjusted, you'll print the alignment form again until you have a copy of the alignment form that is actually 1 inch from all the sides. When you have an alignment form that's all matching, then you can tell it to print a test page. That's basically a simple sample of the form. And somewhere on the form, it will have a registration mark, like that little black circle there with a letter A in it. It's really small. But that should line up, if your alignment is correct, with one of these circle markers here in the corners. So just one more way for you to double check and make sure that the forms are correct. And Atrix will remember these alignment settings once you have them set. So you don't have to do that for every form that you're printing, but it's a good thing to do for the first form that you're printing each year, in case, over the course of the year, something has shifted in the printer and it's pulling the paper slightly differently, something like that. So then once you have everything lined up, then you tell it okay to print. And then everything comes out here printed for you. So this was just a record copy. So we were able to print that one onto plain paper. Once you're done with that form, you tell it next. So now we have the federal form. Click print on that. So this is your internal copy of the federal form. So then basically you move through the forms and clicking print and printing each of the forms and each of the copies that you need. I'm just going to skip past these ones here. Now, because we told it that we wanted to do the complete version where we're going to pay and let Atrix submit the data for us, when we're done printing our copies of the forms, it will pop up this window that lets you log in to their system. So you will have to go out to their website and create a login. And their website is here, sage100.atrix.com. And you can log in and see any files that you've submitted, verify that they have been mailed out and sent to people. Or if it's your first time, you can click the enroll. And this is where you define your login information and your company's contact information. And it would be this login here that you would end up using on this window. And now if you have logged in last year or a prior year, that same login is valid. If you don't remember it anymore, that's where you can use you forgot your login link, and you'll go through a process to retrieve that information from Atrix. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this though. And because I'm exiting out and I told it I was filing for real, it's asking me why I was canceling. So I'm just going to tell it that we were testing the process. And that brings us back to the prepare window where we can verify all of the amounts. So let's say you were in a situation where you have a large number of 1099 vendors, and it's going to take too much time for you to sit down all at once and be able to go through all of them and validate all of their information and make any adjustments and corrections that are needed. You might need to save your progress and come back later and work on it. So to do that, anytime you're in this window, from the File menu in the top left, you can choose Save. Now that that data is saved, we can close that window. And then in Sage, when we come back to the Form 1099 e-filing, instead of using New as the form at the top, we'll change it to History. Again, pick our same form and our year. Then it brings us to this window here where it lets us see any prior saved sessions that we may have had in the past. So here's the one that we just created. You can even see they have the session from last year when you were working on your 1099. So you can click that form and you can choose Edit. That brings us back to the same window. You can pick up where you left off, continuing to validate and make adjustments to the data. And that basically takes us through the process for printing 1099s. So if you have any questions or if there's anything we want me to show in more detail or go over again, go ahead and type that into the questions, and then we'll go back through that.
We do have a question. Do you go all the way through to paying and then go back and start over for 1099 for interest?
Yes, if you have to submit the miscellaneous form and you have to submit the interest forms, they basically treat them like two separate documents. So you go through the entire process, printing and paying for the miscellaneous form, and then you start over and go through the interest forms.
Okay, that was the only question that is showing here. If anybody has any questions, oh, here we have another one. How do you set up the vendors as a 1099 vendor?
So to do that, you go into vendor maintenance. So that's in accounts payable in the main folder, vendor maintenance. You select the vendor. So this vendor here isn't marked as a 1099 vendor. You come in here and choose whether they are a business or an individual. You can assign what their default 1099 form is. And what, in case, because I picked individual, what their social security number is. You can pick what their default box number is. And this step here, where they're picking the default form and box number, is actually the place that most common causes people problems at the end of the year. Because when this vendor was originally set up at the beginning of the year, somebody may have picked the wrong default box number. So all through the year, all the payments you've been making to them have been going against the wrong box number. So this really causes you to then have to fix it when you're going to print your 1099s. So it's important to make sure you're picking the correct defaults here. Once you have that set, then you could come in here. If maybe you have been paying them, but they weren't marked as a 1099, you may need to come into the 1099 history and tell that yes to save the changes. You may need to come in here and put in an amount for what you've already paid them so far this year to get them caught up so that they will then be correct and accurate. But that's how you set up and mark somebody as a 1099 vendor. Anybody else?
That looks to be the last of them.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to go over is the W-2 printing. So if you happen to be at a company that doesn't do payroll yourself or do payroll in-house, then you may not need to be staying for this portion. So we'll go to the payroll module and the W-2 printing. It's very similar to what we just went through for the 1099s, but it is under period end. And then there's two separate ones, federal e-filing or state e-filing. Because the e-filing section, and I need to close out of, oh, see, I still had this question open from the 1099 printing, so it's still counting that I'm in an instance of e-filing. So at the end, when you're done printing your 1099s, it asks you if you want to increment your default 1099 year. That just affects what the default year is when you go in to print your 1099s or when you go in to edit the 1099s. So I don't usually tell it yes until I know I'm all done with 1099 printing. And even if you end up not changing it, it's not a big deal. You can come into the options menu in accounts payable, and you can manually change what the default 1099 year is there as well. Okay, so now let's just open the federal e-filing interface. So in payroll, it has two different sections for federal or state. So the two links here just default which button is checked when you go and open it up. So Atrix includes many reports, not just the W-2 forms. So if you have a lot of different states that you work in, there are probably quite a few different forms that you could be filing through here. So it can be very helpful. Again, there are both free and paid options. So you can pay Atrix to file some of these forms for you, or there's free version where you're basically printing these forms or filling these forms out and then printing them onto plain paper and mailing them to the government yourself. So many people don't go through all the different states and really review what fields or forms are available to them. So it can actually save you a lot of time if you use these forms. So first here under Federal, we're going to scroll down and we're going to select the W-2 form. So we have our 2018 W-2 form. So I think that probably came out today, because yesterday when I was testing it wasn't available yet. So that's good. We can pick over here what year you're reporting on. So we'll leave it at 2018. And then again, we can specify or change any of our company information here, or we can hit accept and proceed with W-2 printing. So it's going through checking and making sure we have the most up-to-date forms. And it's going to give us this message here because some of the address information has changed since last year. So the company name has changed and the address has been adjusted. So it's just asking which of those changes you want to keep. So it walks you through a wizard process where it's going to ask you about your company and let you choose those, answer those questions, and it'll affect what data then prints on your W-2s or what boxes get checked. Most companies, the default answer to the questions is correct. So they have marked that to kind of save you some time. For here, we're going to tell it, no thanks, I want to start processing my W-2s. It lets us change our federal ID number. It asks us if we have multiple companies that are using the same tax ID number. We're going to tell that no. Give us another opportunity to change our company information or fill out any contact info. This one has two separate ones. Ask you if you're filing for your own company or if you're third party. So we're filing for our own company. Here under the state and local tax items, it is showing us all the different states that we have paid employees in this year, and it's letting us see what tax account numbers we have on file for them. If any of those are incorrect, you can come here and edit them. You can also come back into Sage under the Setup folder in Tax Table Maintenance. From here, you can enter your state, and that's where you have your tax ID number for that state. So if any of them are missing, I definitely recommend coming in here and filling out those tax ID numbers so that you won't have to look them up again next year. So if there's no issues with the ID numbers, then we can click Next past the screen. For data verification, do we have any employees that are exempt from Medicare or Social Security taxes? Do you have any employees who are members of the clergy? Do you want to use the control numbers on your W-2s? And do you want any employees, or do you have any employees who elected to receive W-2 forms electronically? So you wanted to answer any of those questions. For your W-3 information, you'd come in here and mark what kind of payer you are. So we're going to mark 941. You can mark whether your business has been terminated this year. So that takes us through all of the wizard questions. So it's building that information and gathering the employee's data all together. And then it's going to show us a grid screen similar to what we saw with the 1099. Okay, just taking a second there. I was worried it was hung up. So in here, same basic process that we saw with the 1099s. We have the left side of the screen that is the employees' information, their names, addresses, that type of data. And the right-hand side, which are the dollar amounts and the different tax amounts that are being withheld this year. So we're going to be clicking the next button, walking through several verification steps. The first one verifies the employee's information. So we'll click next and let the system check that. So this time we have a couple errors. We have one employee that's missing an address line 1 and one employee that has an invalid social security number. So we're going to go back and correct. For the address, it just got entered into the wrong line. So we're going to move that. And for the social security number, we're just going to correct that number as well. And again, I recommend going back into the employees and updating their information there so that it's then correct next time when you're coming and printing any further reports or W-2s. So we'll click next on that verification. Now it's checking the employee's additional information. Now it's verifying some of their wages. So basically you move through the different verification steps, make sure everything balances and you have the correct dollar amounts for all of the employees. And then once you're all through, then it takes us to the printing area. Again, Sage or Atrix has options where they will print all of your 1099s for you, or sorry, all of your W-2s for you and send them out to employees. So that's a really good deal. But this time for demo, I want to tell it to print my employees' W-2s. And we're not going to do any of the e-filing through Atrix. So it has your employees' copies, and then it has the official copies for the federal and state governments. So if you don't choose to do the complete option, it pops up this one last screen here telling you about the benefits of the complete e-filing. So we can tell it yes and move, or next and move past that. Here it's going to let us choose what state that we're going to file in. And then it gives us a summary of the forms that it will be printing. So now that it shows you all of the information here, you can then scroll through if you need to, review any of the data that you want. Then we can print the form. Now this time, because we're not doing the complete e-file, we're actually going to be printing official copies to send out. When we hit the print button, it pops up and gives us the warning message or a message telling us what type of form we should be inserting. So it's telling us to insert the 4-part blank perforated W-2 paper. So again, like we saw with the 1099 forms from the Sage checks, for the W-2 forms, you have the different options here for the ones that you can purchase. So we just tell that OK, and then we tell it to print. So that's just taking a minute to come up. We'll go back. So then we can tell it next to move on to the next form. And up here we can see what form that it's going to be printing. So this one is the employee's W-2 copy. Again, it tells you the 4-part blank perforated. So you basically continue moving through printing your forms. So I'm not going to print all of these, so we'll move on to the next one. So the federal W-2 form, it tells you that it can't be printed on perforated paper. It tells you to insert plain paper now. So you would put in plain paper back into the printer. It has your W-3 form. And then the last form is the notice for the employees. So basically the instructions for when they're doing their taxes. So once you are done printing, it brings up this window here where you can review and see what forms that you have printed already. It lets you choose to reprint any of the forms. You can choose to eFile or print any incomplete W-2s. You can choose to correct any of the W-2s, the ones that were already completed, or you can choose to start over. Once you're done with here, if you don't need to reprint anything, then you can basically tell it to close. And then you're done with that W-2 printing. I want to show you one of the other forms. So we're going to take a look at the 941 form in case you've never used the e-filing for any other forms besides the W-2. I want you to kind of get a feel for what it's like. So going to walk through and ask you some questions about your company again. I'm going to move through and select the defaults for those. So it's going to tell you about their complete e-filing service for other forms. We'll dismiss that. So here it tells you the reporting steps for other types of forms. So you're going to review and edit all of your data, then you're going to print your copy, and then you're going to print the official copy. So the way these forms work, it highlights any of the fields that you can change in blue, and if there's any issues or missing data on any of the forms, it will highlight them in red. And as you click on any of the fields or hover over them, it gives you an explanation of those fields. So it's a really nice utility for helping you fill out forms that maybe you don't deal with very often. So you can see it's specifying here that we need to put in the amount of the total deposits. And you can see each page. And depending on what questions I answer, because I marked that I was semi-weekly, it automatically then recognized that we needed to fill out a Schedule B form for the 941. So basically you go through and make all the changes, put in the amounts that you need to, and then you can either save them, keep working on them later, or you can print them. This doesn't seem to be working, so I'm going to kill that task. So here's the 941 form that it printed for us. So that takes us through all of the W-2 printing. The only other thing I'd like to mention is, so we have gone through here today and demoed on the 2017 version of Sage. The e-filing basically is the same across all the different versions that you may have. So if you're not on 2017, it's basically going to be the same on your version. Also, Sage has come out with version 2018 of Payroll, and they have rewritten Payroll on that version. So things are a little different there. For example, they store multiple years worth of history. So when you close out your fiscal year at the end of the year, it doesn't purge all of your history. So that is all still in your live company. So many people go into backup companies at the end of the year and they print their W-2 forms and other forms from there. Once you get to the 2018 version of Sage, you won't need to do that anymore. You'll be able to just print all of your forms in the live version of Sage. So we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in and we can go over those.
Doesn't look like we have any questions, but if you have anything after the webinar ends that you think of, or you have any problems with your year-end processing, feel free to contact the help desk at helpdesk@swktech.com. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you all for joining us today. Oh, wait, we have one?
We had one question pop in.
Yep. In Sage 2018 with Payroll 2018, do we need to make a backup copy of the company?
You don't have to make a backup copy. You'll be able to process multiple years worth of payroll in your live company. Some people may continue to make backup copies of their companies just as a comfort level and a place to be able to go back and review easily exactly the way the company was at the end of the year. But you don't have to do it to be able to do any of your reporting. Like you'll be able to, in the 2018 version of Sage, start processing your payroll in next year, in 2019, before you've printed your W-2 forms for 2018. So that's one of the limitations they've corrected now.
Are there any issues with Oregon transit tax?
I'm personally not familiar with that, so I don't know if there would be or not.
We can check and get back with you on that.
There's a question about whether you would need to print your W-2s before you close out the year. So if you are on version 2017 and lower, yes, you need to print your W-2s before you close fiscal year end and before you start processing the payroll in the new company. That is what a lot of people do with their backup company. They make a backup copy of the company, and from there they will go and research information and verify all the amounts and print their W-2s from that backup company. And in the live company, they'll close the year and process any checks and stuff that they need to in that new live company. And that backup company would basically always stay out there as a 2018 company, and you wouldn't close that company, close out the year. So it looks like the question about local tax, you said that you coded it in 2016, or the Oregon tax, you coded it as a local tax. And your question is how would it be corrected when the W-2s are printed? So if you're not wanting it to print there as a local tax, in the screen where you're verifying all of your employees' information and the W-2 amounts, you can change any of the dollar amounts on there. So you would be able to, from that screen, move those amounts into any other box that they should print on for the W-2s. So I believe that's what you're asking. Yeah, in that grid where we had the employee information and I was fixing the address that was incorrect and I was fixing the social security number, from that screen you can also verify and fix any of the dollar amounts that are printing in any of the boxes. So you would be able to move or change those from that screen.
And one other question, how is data from Sage 2016 transferred to 2018 regarding the W-2s?
Do you mean like upgrading to the 2018 version of Sage. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah, when you upgrade, they go through a process that basically identifies your data. It redefines the tax setups in the company, reassigns those tax codes to employees. So it goes through history and moves that information forward. So I don't know if it would be able to go back to a prior year and reprint a W-2 from there once you're in 2018. But for any years that you processed the payroll in the 2018 version of Sage, you would be able to go back and print those prior ones. I think that's the question you're asking. Okay, I understand. So the question is, if you're moving the local tax amounts in that grid, when you're processing your W-2s, how will it show up in 2018? Basically, in 2018, it'll still be in Sage as being a local tax. Any changes that you're making in that grid don't write back to the data in Sage, to the payroll history there. So yeah, that won't transfer forward into 2018. Correct. Yeah, any changes that you make in that grid are basically changes for those forms, the 1099, W-2, that you're printing right then. Next question, if you change forms, will it affect reporting to states? I don't understand what you mean by change forms. So the example is if you move the local amounts to the state in the W-2 grid. So yeah, if you're moving and changing those amounts that print on the forms for the states, yeah, when you print the state's copy of the W-2, it's going to change the amounts for that state's copy as well. Next question is, will it also be moved to the state on other W-2 state forms? I don't think I understand your question. So yeah, changes that you make in the grid for the W-2, those changes are specific for those W-2 forms that you're changing or that you're going to be printing right then. Those changes aren't going to affect any other forms that you may be printing through the e-filing. So any dollar amounts you're moving or changing there aren't going to affect any other forms or even the next time you go in there to print. Yeah, all the other forms wouldn't be changed by changes you make on the grid for W-2s. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming. We appreciate all of you, and we will be gathering all this data together, gathering the recordings, and sending out both recordings to everybody next week once the second webinar is finished.